On screen, Glenn Ford embodied the image of the everyday Hollywood man, but off screen, his life was anything but ordinary. From serving in World War II to his countless Hollywood romances, Ford's life was filled with both dazzling success and deep heartbreak. Yet through it all, he carried a secret, one so carefully guarded that even his closest friends and lovers never knew. Glenn Ford was born Gwilyn Samuel Newton Ford on May 1st in a working-class town in Quebec, Canada. However, his childhood was far from difficult. His father, a railroad executive, had connections to powerful figures, including a Canadian Prime Minister and an American President. And while many Canadian children endured harsh winters, Ford never had to. When his father secured a job in California, the family relocated to Santa Monica, a move that would place Ford on the path to Hollywood stardom. From an early age, Ford was drawn to the stage. He participated in high school plays and after graduation joined local theater groups to refine his craft. Initially, he worked as a stage manager, but a startling realization changed everything. He discovered that actors earned nearly 10 times as much as stage managers. That was all the motivation he needed. He was determined to shift gears and pursue acting as a full-time career. While Ford was eager to chase his Hollywood dreams, his father insisted on a practical approach. He supported his son's ambition but urged him to learn a trade in case acting didn't work out. Ford took this advice seriously and gained experience working as a roofer, window installer, and bartender before breaking into the film industry. Though these jobs were just stepping stones, the skills he picked up along the way would prove useful later in life. Ford's rise to fame was largely a matter of being in the right place at the right time. Columbia Pictures studio head Harry Cohn was looking to build his own roster of stars, rather than relying on talent discarded by larger studios. However, Cohn had a reputation for being frugal. He wanted young, attractive, and talented actors who weren't yet famous so he could sign them for low salaries. And Glenn Ford? He was exactly what Cohn was looking for. Cohn offered Ford a contract, making him one of Columbia Pictures' first homegrown stars. But that didn't mean success came easily. Instead of fast-tracking Ford to stardom, Cohn decided to test him. He signed another promising young actor, William Holden, and pitted the two against each other. Hollywood was notorious for its scandals, and Cohn assumed that one of them would inevitably slip up, get caught in controversy, and self-destruct. That way, he'd always have a backup. However, his plan didn't go as expected. Rather than becoming rivals, Ford and Holden developed a strong friendship, and neither of them landed in any major trouble, at least not yet. Ford's feature film debut came in the 1939 drama Heaven with a Barbed Wire Fence, but what should have been a triumphant moment turned into a nightmare. Director Ricardo Cortez relentlessly bullied him throughout the shoot, making every day on set miserable. The worst humiliation came when Cortez berated Ford in front of the entire crew, publicly calling him a terrible actor and even saying he regretted hiring him. Ford never forgot the incident or forgave it. The experience was so discouraging that Ford briefly left Hollywood. However, fate had other plans. Years later, after he had established himself as a major star, he ran into Ricardo Cortez at a Los Angeles restaurant. The memory of his humiliation came rushing back, and Ford nearly attacked the director right then and there. This wasn't the last time Ford let his temper get the best of him. His tough guy persona wasn't just for the screen, and throughout his life he had more than a few heated confrontations. Despite his rocky start, Ford continued working his way through a series of forgettable B-movies for Columbia Pictures. However, in 1940, one film changed everything. The lady in question may not have been a blockbuster, but it marked a major turning point in Ford's life. It was on this set that he met Rita Hayworth, a rising starlet who would go on to become one of Hollywood's most iconic actresses. Their chemistry was undeniable, both on and off the screen. Columbia Pictures' studio head Harry Cohn had hired Glenn Ford because he wanted a scandal-free leading man, but he may have underestimated Ford's charm. Though he had yet to make a name for himself in Hollywood, Ford had already built quite the reputation as a ladies' man. While filming The Lady in Question, he wasn't just captivated by Rita Hayworth. He was also involved with his other co-star, Evelyn Keyes. Juggling two high-profile affairs at once was bold, but for Ford, it was just the beginning. While Cohn wasn't exactly giving Ford golden opportunities to showcase his talent, someone else saw his potential. Director John Cromwell cast him in So Ends Our Night, a World War II drama that turned out to be a massive success, but not without controversy. At the time, the U.S. had not yet entered the war, and Hollywood studios were under pressure to avoid negative portrayals of Nazi Germany. However, the independent producers behind So Ends Our Night defied these restrictions, making it the first explicitly anti-Nazi film in Hollywood. Their gamble paid off, and the film became a landmark moment in American cinema. Ford's performance stood out, even alongside Oscar-nominated co-stars. Critics raved about his acting, but even more impressively, the film caught the attention of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So impressed was FDR that he arranged for a private screening of the movie at the White House. Moved by its message, he invited Ford to his birthday ball, where the young actor had the honor of meeting First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. The entire experience left Ford in awe, and upon returning home, he immediately registered as a Democrat. However, despite all the praise and political recognition, So Ends Our Night didn't quite launch Ford into the stardom he had hoped for. Instead of capitalizing on his momentum, Columbia Pictures did the bare minimum. Rather than giving their rising star high-profile roles, they relegated him to a string of mediocre, forgettable films. His moment in the spotlight began to fade, and his status as Hollywood's next big thing quickly fizzled out. However, Ford didn't let the studio's indifference go to waste. He used his earnings to buy his mother and sister a house in the Pacific Palisades, ensuring that his family was taken care of. Just when it seemed like his career was losing steam, everything changed. In 1941, Glenn Ford took his first step toward military service by joining the Coast Guard Auxiliary, balancing his training with part-time film work. But within months, everything changed. The U.S. officially entered World War II, and like many Hollywood stars of the time, Ford began touring the country to promote war bonds. Of course, in true Ford fashion, his involvement in the war effort wasn't just about duty. He found plenty of time for romance along the way. During one of his USO appearances, Ford met the stunning young actress Eleanor Powell, and the two quickly fell for each other. But their whirlwind romance wasn't the only thing Ford was rushing into. After spending a year balancing war bond promotions and lackluster movie roles, he grew restless. Then in the middle of filming Destroyer, he made a shocking decision. Without consulting anyone, he impulsively enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve. His friends and family were stunned, and Columbia Pictures was left scrambling to figure out how to finish the film without their leading man. With Ford already committed, the studio had no choice but to negotiate with the Marines for an extra 4 weeks so he could wrap up Destroyer. But that wasn't the only major life change happening. Amid all the chaos, Ford proposed to Powell, and in an equally impulsive move, she announced that she was retiring from acting to focus on supporting her soon-to-be husband. It was a whirlwind of decisions, all unfolding at breakneck speed. Once Ford arrived at the Marine Corps base in San Diego, he quickly found a sense of purpose that Hollywood had never quite given him. His natural leadership qualities didn't go unnoticed. Officers immediately offered him a higher ranking position, but Ford refused, insisting that he work his way up the ranks like everyone else. True to his word, he earned his way to the rank of sergeant, accumulating multiple honors along the way. With training complete, it was finally time for him to go into battle. But as it turned out, things wouldn't go quite as planned. When Glenn Ford enlisted in the Marine Corps, his longtime friend, William Holden, joined the Army Air Corps. Both actors were so committed to the Allied cause that they willingly put their budding Hollywood careers on hold, fully aware that fame was fleeting. Neither expected to be remembered by audiences when or if they returned home. But just as Ford's life seemed to be moving forward, everything came to a screeching halt. His wife, Eleanor Powell, was pregnant with their first child, and he had just been accepted into officer training school when disaster struck. He suddenly fell ill and was diagnosed with duodenal ulcers, a painful condition that left him hospitalized for 5 months. What had started as a bold new chapter in his life was now at a standstill. His military career was on hold, and his Hollywood future seemed more uncertain than ever. Despite his dedication and enthusiasm, Ford never saw combat. After spending time at various bases, his ongoing health issues led to a medical discharge. For all the sacrifices he had made, he never set foot on the battlefield. However, his service didn't go entirely unrecognized. The Marines awarded him 3 medals for his contributions on the home front. Still, the experience was a frustrating disappointment. His time in the military had been cut short, and his film career was still in limbo. But just when it seemed like things had stalled, Ford's luck took a dramatic turn. His first film after the war turned out to be a game changer. By sheer chance, he landed a leading role in Gilda, starring opposite Rita Hayworth in what would become one of the most iconic femme fatale performances of all time. Initially, critics didn't know what to make of the film. Gilda was an early example of film noir, a genre that was still taking shape, but over time it became a classic, cementing Ford's status as a Hollywood leading man. His career was back on track, and his star was rising fast. However, just as quickly as things fell into place, Ford was about to throw it all into chaos with a scandalous mistake. On the set of Gilda, Glenn Ford and Rita Hayworth formed a deep connection that would last a lifetime. However, behind the scenes, their relationship was far more complicated. Almost as soon as they met, they began a passionate affair, despite the fact that both were already married. Ford was still with Eleanor Powell, while Hayworth was married to Orson Welles. Her troubled relationship with Welles was already a source of concern for Columbia Pictures head Harry Cohn. So when he discovered her secret romance with Ford, he was livid. Cohn's worst fears soon came true when gossip magazines began circulating rumors about Ford and Hayworth's off-screen relationship. Furious, he repeatedly demanded that Ford end the affair, but Ford ignored his warnings. Refusing to let the scandal grow any further, Cohn came up with a more underhanded tactic. He ordered hidden recording devices to be installed in Ford and Hayworth's dressing rooms, hoping to catch them in the act. What Cohn didn't anticipate was that Ford and Hayworth had allies behind the scenes. The studio's sound department, tasked with setting up the recording equipment, secretly warned the actors about the surveillance. With this knowledge, Ford and Hayworth took extra precautions, ensuring their private moments remained private. Meanwhile, they played it safe on set, allowing Gilda to wrap without further controversy. Although they managed to outsmart Cohn, his obsession with spying on his stars didn't stop there. And years later, Ford would take what he learned from this experience and put it to use in a shocking way. Since his affair with Rita Hayworth had gone largely unpunished, Glenn Ford saw no reason to change his ways. Instead of learning from the experience, he continued pursuing romances with any starlet willing to indulge him. But despite his reputation as a womanizer, Ford wasn't completely detached. Sometimes his emotions got the best of him. While filming The Green Glove, he found himself completely smitten with his co-star, Geraldine Brooks. This time, however, his feelings ran deeper than his usual flings. When Ford realized just how much Brooks meant to him, he knew he was treading dangerous ground. His name had already appeared in the gossip columns too many times, and his reputation was starting to take a hit. Still, he couldn't help himself. He made his move, only to be met with an icy rejection. Brooks wasn't interested, and her response was brutal. Ford was left humiliated, but instead of moving on, he spiraled. Being turned down wasn't new for Ford, but this time, his reaction was downright alarming. While filming in Nice, he drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and in a moment of impulsive desperation, decided to abandon everything. Packing his bags, he marched to the French Foreign Legion headquarters, fully intending to enlist, leaving behind his film career, his wife, and even his young son. Fortunately, his co-star Cedric Hardwicke caught wind of Ford's reckless plan and rushed to stop him. He tracked Ford down just in time, convincing him to return to the set. Ford eventually got over his infatuation with Brooks, but this episode was a turning point in his life. His reckless tendencies were only growing stronger, and soon there would be no turning back. For a brief period, Ford tried to rein himself in, making an effort to keep his distance from his female co-stars. Ironically, this only led to rumors that he was arrogant or standoffish. Before long, he slipped back into his old habits, rekindling his affair with Rita Hayworth and pursuing other leading ladies like Gloria Graham and Barbara Stanwyck. Despite his personal entanglements, his career remained steady. In fact, he scored one of his biggest career wins with Blackboard Jungle, a groundbreaking film that featured a young Sidney Poitier. Blackboard Jungle wasn't just a career-defining film for Glenn Ford. It was also a major moment in music history, and surprisingly, Ford himself played a role in that. One night, he invited director Richard Brooks to his home, where Brooks overheard Ford's son, Peter, playing Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and his Comets. At the time, the song was relatively unknown, but Brooks decided to use it in the film's soundtrack. The decision proved to be groundbreaking. Blackboard Jungle became the first Hollywood movie to feature a rock and roll song, and the track skyrocketed to the top of the charts. Thanks to its inclusion in the film, Rock Around the Clock became a defining anthem of the era. The success of Blackboard Jungle gave Ford the push he needed to make a bold career move. For years, he had been under contract with Columbia Pictures, the studio that had made him a star, but also one that had closely monitored his personal life. Studio head Harry Cohn had spent years both shaping Ford's career and chastising him for his private affairs. When Ford's contract with Columbia ended, he saw his chance to break free. He went freelance, still appearing in a few Columbia films, but ultimately signed a long-term deal with MGM after seeing what they had done with Blackboard Jungle. By the 1950s, he had fully established himself as a major box office draw, particularly in westerns. While Ford was busy making films and charming leading ladies, his wife Eleanor Powell was dealing with her own struggles. She had stood by him through countless scandals, given up her career to be his wife, and even caught him in the act with the other women more than once. By the mid-1950s, she had reached her breaking point and wanted out. However, there was one issue: custody of their son Peter. Powell knew Ford would put up a fight, so she played the long game. She waited until Peter was 14, old enough to choose which parent he wanted to live with. Then, once she was sure she had the upper hand, she filed for divorce. Ford did not take it well. Although he was hardly the victim in the situation, Ford certainly acted like one. He distanced himself from both Powell and Peter, making little effort to maintain a relationship with his son. When it came to alimony, he was famously stingy, grumbling about every dollar he had to pay. However, there was little reason for him to complain. By this point, he was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, and now that he was officially single, he had nothing holding him back. Glenn Ford's reputation as a ladies' man only intensified after his divorce. At the height of his fame, he had affairs with nearly every major leading lady of Hollywood's golden age: Jean Tierney, Eva Gabor, Joan Crawford, and even a one-night stand with Marilyn Monroe. But as time went on, his romantic escapades extended to the next generation of starlets, including Judy Garland, Debbie Reynolds, Jill St. John, and Brigitte Bardot. Yet no matter how many women came and went, there was always Rita Hayworth. Their connection remained unbreakable, even after years of separations and reunions. In fact, following his divorce, Ford moved next door to Hayworth. Just as she was going through her 5th divorce, it seemed they were destined to always find their way back to each other. But while their on-again, off-again relationship endured, Ford's career was beginning to unravel. For years, Ford had been untouchable in Hollywood, but the early 1960s brought a harsh reality check. His once flawless career took a hit with back-to-back box office failures. First, there was Cimarron, a big-budget Western that bombed spectacularly, followed by The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse in 1962, an even bigger disaster. Though Ford still managed to land occasional hits afterward, he never regained the superstar status he once held. Despite his professional struggles, there was one bright spot. Among all the affairs and fleeting romances, Ford formed a real connection with young actress Katherine Hayes. In 1966, he remarried, hoping for stability at last. Unfortunately, their relationship was doomed from the start. Just 3 years later, the marriage fell apart, leaving Ford alone once again, heartbroken and burdened with another alimony bill that he begrudgingly paid. He soon returned to his womanizing ways, but the thrill of the chase was beginning to fade. With another failed marriage behind him and his career slowing down, Ford threw himself into his hobbies, though with mixed results. In an attempt to live more self-sufficiently, he decided to take up farming in the backyard of his Beverly Hills home. He started small, buying 40 Leghorn hens to provide fresh eggs for himself and his son, Peter. However, things quickly spiraled out of control. His modest flock soon grew to 140 birds, and before long, his attempt at farming became more of a chaotic disaster than a sustainable lifestyle. Ford's attempt at backyard farming took a dramatic turn when a fox began picking off his hens. Determined to protect his ever-growing flock, he decided to take matters into his own hands. One night, he staked out his yard with a shotgun, waiting to catch the culprit. Instead of stopping the fox, all he managed to do was alarm his Beverly Hills neighbors, who were less than thrilled to see an armed Glenn Ford lurking outside. Local authorities quickly got involved, reminding him that both raising chickens and hunting within city limits were illegal. With no choice but to abandon his farming experiment, Ford returned to his usual pastimes, namely pursuing women. Despite his chaotic personal life, Ford remained committed to the military long after World War II. He continued serving in the Naval Reserves, mostly in a promotional capacity, helping to recruit and support the Navy through advertisements. However, when the Vietnam War escalated, his involvement became much more hands-on. In 1967, he traveled to Vietnam to produce a training film for young Marines. He also worked with a combat camera team, documenting missions from the demilitarized zone to the Mekong Delta. Unlike World War II, where he had never left U.S. soil, Ford was now in the heart of a war zone. Both the Marine Corps and the Navy recognized his service, awarding him multiple medals for his contributions. By the early 1970s, Ford, like many of his Hollywood peers, recognized that television was becoming the dominant medium. Rather than waiting for his film career to decline completely, he made the transition to TV, hoping to reinvent himself. CBS built a series around him, giving him a starring role, but the show failed to take off and was canceled after just one season. Ford continued making occasional appearances, but his days as a major leading man seemed to be behind him, until an unexpected opportunity put him back in the spotlight. In 1978, Ford landed what would become one of his most memorable roles, Jonathan Kent in Superman. Though his screen time was brief, his performance as Clark Kent's adoptive father was poignant and well received. The role provided him with steady work, ensuring that he remained in demand throughout the later years of his career. It also came with a much-needed financial boost, something Ford would soon come to rely on. His next marriage to Cynthia Hayworth lasted longer than his previous one, but not by much. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, he had cycled through several broken engagements, and his final marriage in the 90s was his shortest yet, lasting just a single year. While he had no shortage of love affairs throughout his life, marriage was never his strong suit. Each divorce took a heavy toll, both emotionally and financially, leaving him increasingly isolated. After spending decades in the company of Hollywood's most beautiful women, Ford found himself alone in his final years. As his health declined in the 1990s, Ford quietly stepped away from acting and spent the last 15 years of his life in relative seclusion. Despite this, Hollywood had not forgotten him. In honor of his 90th birthday, the American Cinematheque organized a special tribute event, including a screening of Gilda to celebrate his career. Ford had planned to attend, eager to be recognized for his contributions to cinema, but fate had other plans. His health took a turn for the worse, forcing him to miss the event. Just 4 months later, he was gone. On August 30th, 2006, Glenn Ford passed away at his home in Beverly Hills at the age of 90. Tributes poured in from friends, co-stars, and admirers, celebrating his legacy as one of Hollywood's most enduring leading men. Soon after his passing, long-held secrets began to surface, and the source was none other than his son, Peter. Ford's relationship with his son had been complicated over the years, but in the time leading up to his death, he had shared many untold stories. In 2011, Peter Ford released Glenn Ford, A Life, a biography that took the concept of a tell-all to the extreme. Relying on his father's personal diaries, Peter detailed Ford's astonishing number of affairs. By his own count, his father had been romantically involved with at least 146 actresses over the years. His affair with Rita Hayworth, which began in 1946, was an on-again, off-again love story that stretched across more than 4 decades. Despite all the women who passed through Ford's life, Hayworth remained different. She was fragile, complicated, and in many ways, the one woman he could never completely let go of. They continued seeing each other up until her death, but their relationship was far from a fairy tale. Their affair had already caused problems while filming Gilda, but things became even more complicated when they reunited for the loves of Carmen. This time, their secret wasn't just whispers and rumors. Hayworth was pregnant. Both had careers that had barely survived their previous scandal, and neither was willing to risk another public firestorm. Faced with an impossible decision, Ford and Hayworth went their separate ways. She had just finalized her divorce from Orson Welles, and another scandal was the last thing she needed. In secrecy, she traveled to France to have an abortion, while Ford returned home to his wife and son. The affair had survived for years, but this moment left a scar that neither of them could fully heal from. Soon after, Hayworth abandoned her Hollywood career for an ill-fated marriage to Prince Ali Khan. Their secret remained buried for decades, but incredibly, it wasn't even the most shocking revelation in Peter Ford's book. During his first affair with Hayworth, Ford became obsessed with keeping their relationship hidden, going to extreme lengths to avoid exposure. It turned out that Harry Cohn's surveillance tactics had left a lasting impression on him, so much so that Ford decided to do a little spying of his own. In an act of pure paranoia, he wiretapped his own wife's phone, listening in on her conversations to see what she was saying about him. What began as a way to protect himself soon became something far more twisted. Ford's obsession with recording didn't stop there. For the next 40 years, he taped every phone conversation he had, collecting an extensive archive of private discussions. The recordings included calls with his many lovers, but also with some of Hollywood's biggest names: Frank Sinatra, John Wayne, Cary Grant, Lucille Ball, and James Stewart, to name just a few. However, what made this collection even more shocking was that Ford had secretly recorded conversations with two sitting U.S. presidents. One was Ronald Reagan, an old friend from his Hollywood days. The other, Richard Nixon, who ironically would later become infamous for his own secret tapes. No one knew about Ford's decades-long surveillance operation until after his death, when his son Peter uncovered the recordings. And the tapes weren't the only things he had hoarded. Ford's Beverly Hills estate, once the ultimate bachelor pad, was filled with memorabilia from his decades in Hollywood. However, some of his keepsakes were more personal than others. In 2008, Peter Ford held an auction to sell off some of his father's belongings, and among the most eye-catching items was an old couch. According to Peter, Ford had seduced Marilyn Monroe on that very couch 46 years earlier. Glenn Ford's life was filled with fame, romance, and Hollywood success, but his final years were marked by loneliness, declining health, and the weight of his past. Even after his passing, shocking revelations about his secret recordings, hidden affairs, and untold scandals came to light, adding new layers to his already fascinating story. But despite the controversies, his legacy as one of Hollywood's most versatile and talented actors remains intact. What do you think was the most surprising part of Glenn Ford's life? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories.